Chapter 3. The Journal of Clayton Marcells, October 23rd, 2049. At the turn of the century, air flight had been the most popular means of travel for long-distance journeys. However, in the years following the gas shortages and Middle Eastern wars, it had become shunned as a wasteful, extravagant, and environmentally costly remnant of a time when clean air and energy had been taken for granted. Public transportation had become a staple of the modern times, and by use of hydrogen-powered generators, getting from point A to point B had become affordable and incredibly fast. The drawback being the occasional monumentally destructive explosion that could lay waste to hundreds of acres of densely populated areas, a risk that engineers and technicians had been forced to take by new, strict government standards. I found myself stepping onto the service platform and pushing my way through the crowded streets to the underground transit rail which would take me to the university campus. My appointment with Levine was scheduled for 2:30, but I did not arrive until 3. I was told at the main office that he was gone for the day, but he had left instructions for me to meet him at his flat in the city. I decided to spring for a cab as I knew a bus would prove an even greater expense of my already dwindling daylight. Levine's apartment building was like many in Portland, a subtle 4-story structure of the old turn-of-the-century design. The city had always tried to retain an antique aesthetic, but made it appear like a set from some old movie from 2000. Many of the shops and restaurants I passed were still made of brick and concrete, which put me in mind of my childhood in Atlanta. I found myself in the front hallway of the building, standing before a console of intercom buzzers, searching for apartment 13. Pressing the button, I waited until the retinal security scanner opened, and a voice eerily familiar as the holographic skull said, "Retinal ID, please, and then I'll ring you in." I placed my eyes before the glowing red beam and winced as the sudden flash captured the structuring of my iris and retina. "Come on up," the voice said, as if I were an old friend coming to visit. I approached the elevator and noticed the presence of multiple security cameras, hidden in various placements around the lobby. Once more, I scanned my eye at the elevator door before it would open. Once inside, I hit the button for the 4th floor, and in moments I was entering the hallway. I studied the decor and was pleased to see the classic motif was used inside the building as well, with pleasant flat-screen digital murals depicting classic works of art and charming rural scenes of farmhouses and pastures covered in scattered blandishments of wildflowers. I found room 13, and passing in front of the camera globe, introduced myself to the camera. Another retinal scanner flashed on, and sighing, I was once more temporarily blinded by the red flash. I heard the door automatically unlatch from within, and I stepped through into a small decontamination chamber the size of an ancient phone booth. I looked around incredulously as I was scanned by traveling horizontal red beams and then flashed with a non-toxic antibacterial spray which smelled faintly of bleach. The clear, glass-like plastic door before me hissed as it slid open, and I entered into a very cozy, if extremely sterile, set of apartment rooms. The interior was much more modern and kept little, if any, of the outside world's appearance. The walls and the floor were clear china white like porcelain, and everything was lit so brightly that no corner was left in darkness. I looked around to find my host seated at a metallic computer desk before an entire wall which served as a series of computer monitors. "Mr. Marcells," came the familiar voice once more. "I'm pleased that you came. After checking the scheduling for the Trant and today's traffic reports, I assumed you'd be late and moved our meeting here. It's better that we meet in a more secure location than the college, anyway." As I approached, I could see the back of his head, which had only the bare stubble of blonde hair left unshaved, and noticed that behind his ear was a small surgical scar like my own. The amount of security pertaining to his data made sense as I realized that he, too, was a WINAR, wireless interface neural implant recipient. He turned in his chair, revealing a slight-built young man in his mid-20s with a short blonde beard the same length as his hair, and large gray-blue eyes that I found vaguely unsettling. He wore only a plain white shirt with cut-off sleeves and baggy camouflage shorts that hung over his knees. "Dr. Levine," I said, offering my hand. He rubbed his arms, which were covered in stylized tattoos of medieval alchemical designs and symbols, as he stared with certain unease at my gesture. "I don't shake hands, Mr. Marcells. If you haven't figured it out by now, I'm very cautious when it comes to contaminations from the outside." I withdrew my gesture and sat down in the clear plastic chair which he indicated. "I know who you are and what you do, Mr. Marcells. Yamashita is up a creek and you're looking for a paddle. However, I regret to inform you that they are SOL in all accounts. The entire Ghostlight project was flawed from the get-go, and no one should have been using it outside of experimental physicists and engineers properly trained and educated as to its properties. Neil Kenny was not a serial killer, and I'm sure that countless people have been imprisoned wrongly based on the scanner as evidence in their trial. So, do you know what exactly is going on with the flawed scanner recording?" I asked, trying to sound as non-evasive and conversational as possible. "Oh, I know, and so does Yamashita. And exactly why are they even bothering to hire me to investigate?" I asked, feeling like a mouse who was edging a little too close to a trap. "They don't want you to investigate, Mr. Marcells. They want you to erase. They want to pretend like they never knew the truth behind the scanner, and they want you to terminate any who might be able to reveal those facts to the public." The set of sterling silver piercings which ringed his eyebrows glinted over the steel gray of his gaze. "So, aren't you the least bit concerned that I might be here to do exactly that?" I said, veiling the threat with a friendly smile. "You're not an assassin, Mr. Marcells, no matter what you may think of yourself. And what do you know about me, Dr. Levine?" "Quite a bit, really. Like, for instance, I know that a brain scan done on you when you were first received your implant revealed that you possess the brain makeup of a clinical psychopath. Your empathy ratings really are extremely low. But I must assure you that the psychological depression that you have battled your entire life is asymptomatic of psychopathy. I'm guessing by the nature of several of the essays you wrote while obtaining your tech degree that although you may not experience basic everyday empathy, that you do exhibit a higher brain function of rationalized ethical standards towards your fellow human beings. You have a learned empathy, Mr. Marcells, and often that is a stronger defining force in personality than brain functions. You are not a killer. You have destroyed data and have committed illegal memory erasure on numerous occasions when it would have been all the easier to simply terminate the life of those in question, as is common in your line of work. As for me, you are not going to destroy my data, and I guarantee you that if you value your central nervous system, you will in no way tamper with my memory." I gazed at the man who was 20 years my junior and realized that I was in the presence of a cyberware specialist well beyond my level of expertise. "So, why even bother to meet with me then?" I was gazing at the various segments of his monitor and noting that he was currently running a projection on a very complex mathematical formula. "Because I think that you may be able to help me," he said as he reached over and typed several commands into the open air as if it were his desktop keyboard. "Do you want to know what you have gotten yourself involved in?" "I don't like flying blind, if that's what you're asking. Let me warn you that if I let you in on this little conspiracy, then you will immediately be put on Yamashita's hit list should they find out that you are aware of the facts in this situation." "Okay, I'll bite. What the hell are you talking about?" "Yamashita has been involved in testing quantum bridge technology since the mid-20s, when an unidentified blast of anomalous energy was recorded by 6 orbiting corporate satellites over the southern United States. This pulse was unlike anything that had ever been witnessed, and was virtually undetectable to any technology currently available. It resembled many of the documented forms of invisible light and energy that science was aware of, but was unclassifiable in a definite scientific profile. The catch was that during the period between 2000 and 2005 and 2026, satellites were viewing imagery that was not being seen by regular digital viewing systems or the people occupying the area. Levine hit a command, and suddenly the entire wall was a single image of the entire southern United States as seen from space. This image was taken by a device that was the primitive predecessor of our ghost light scanners before the introduction of Indigo 9. The central idea of this device was that alternate energy forms can be detected occasionally under certain conditions. The scientific world had become aware that these energies existed after a European space probe sent to record radiation strains outside of a black hole detected ray patterns we previously had not witnessed. The study of reproducing these energy wavelengths artificially would eventually lead to the discovery of Indigo 9. Or so we've been told, but I digress. As you can see in these first visual images reveal what appears to be a large circular formation of energy with an epicenter over the state of Mississippi. The satellites continued to capture occasional glimpses of the growing anomaly for the entire year until it just abruptly disappeared. Levine seemed giddy with excitement, and I guess that I was one of a very few people who had been privy to his dialogue. Now, Mr. Missells, I want you to examine this image very carefully. I stared at the image and began to closely study the area within the large storm-like circle presented by the aerial view. What I noticed was that the landscape within the circumference of the circle seemed distorted and changed as compared to similar views I had witnessed. It was as if a different, alternate landscape had been superimposed over the area present within the anomaly. That's not the United States, I said with awe as I stood to examine the imagery closer. Here, let me enhance it for you. And as he did so, my mouth fell agape at the sight of what appeared to be the apparition of a vast sea covering much of the area as if it were flooded. Yet, clearly behind it was the actual visible landscape of what I knew to be the American South, complete with cities, towns, and roads. "What am I looking at?" I said as I sat back down, my eyes still locked on the image. It's like a superimposition of another image over the map. Like the double exposure of some old photograph. Levine was beside himself with intense glee. And that's no technical glitch, Mr. Missells. That is the same area, but with a completely reformed landscape. That is the South, as it was almost completely underwater. Florida's gone, and the rest is a giant wetland. And not to mention, Mr. Missells, Levine said, interrupting himself as he typed another quick command. There are 2 other such anomalies recorded over the Soviet Union and the Fiji Islands with similar qualities. As he spoke, the monitor segmented into 3 split screens, each of which showed a similar image as the one over the southern United States. So, what is it then? I was noticing that in the images presented within the circle of the anomalies that there appeared to be damage and destruction on a frightening scale. There were small spots within the American image that even looked as if large areas were sunken and burning. As I studied it closer, Levine smiled. Finally noticed that, huh? He chuckled as he magnified it so that the small area now covered the entire wall. Let me clean that up for you. He now ran a simple digital clarification of the image's definition on the screen, and in brief seconds, I was staring at a translucent aerial photograph of what appeared to be a nuclear reactor years into a full meltdown. You know they were supposed to have backup programming so that if something happened and there were no people to staff them, that they would shut themselves down. Then, back in 2030, they did a massive safety inspection and found out that something like 50% of our reactors would likely bypass any safety programming if precautions weren't taken by staff to ensure a full shutdown before they abandoned their assigned posts. I don't think these reactors made it long enough for them to catch that. What do you mean? Just explain this to me before my brain collapses, I said, feeling like Levine was savoring my mental distress, but then realized that he was simply waiting for me to catch up. It's another world, isn't it? I felt as if I had just been administered a psychoactive substance as my mind began to assimilate what I had just learned. Well, another version of our world, to be more exact, and one that didn't quite turn out so well, if I may be presumptuous. From what I can gather from studying these images, that world had become a nightmare like you would not believe, my friend. I'm guessing that ecologically, it bit the big one back in 2021. So, these anomalies were wormholes. I was still gazing at the missing Gulf Coast with horror as I tried to visualize a disaster that could alter the physical makeup of the Earth to such a great extent. More like the residual aura from wormholes. We never would have even noticed it if it hadn't been for those satellites. For all we know, Mr. Marcells, it happens all the time. For whatever reason, though, we got a glimpse while the quantum fabric was thin. And that was all that Yamashita needed to begin their program. It just so happened that the Welsh guy stumbled across the correct formula that we were looking for anyway. At least that's what we've been told. How the hell did they keep this a secret? Well, I would think that would be obvious. People like you, Mr. Marcells. Lots and lots of people like you. Chapter 4. Journal entry of Dr. Jarvis Newtown, December 7th, 2033. It's a damn cold day. I love this city, but the winters are killing me. I'm getting tired of huddling in the apartment every night. I miss outdoor tennis. Tara's damn ghost gets on my nerves around the holidays. She starts acting like she's cooking holiday meals and decorating the goddamn Christmas tree, bless her departed heart. The kids will show up in a couple of weeks to visit, and she may briefly seem lucid, but otherwise she'll just keep poking around like every day is Christmas. Guess I should be grateful, as I know of several people who would consider my situation with Tara to be a blessing. A young woman who came into the office for a routine eye exam a week ago related a tale of woe concerning the ghost of her deceased uncle who visited their family home at the same time and day every week. The true misfortune being that the fellow was reenacting the last night of his mortal life when he came begging this woman's father, his brother, for a substantial sum of money to pay off his gambling debt. Her father had refused on the grounds that he had already lent the man money 3 times over the past year. The police had collected the man's body from the Chicago River the following day. That had been when the woman was a mere child, and now she was in her early 30s and married with children of her own, and once a week they were forced to witness the disturbing replay of the man's desperate pleads before leaving terrified and rejected into the night. She said that she and her husband had made Thursdays their night out, but at times circumstances might still find them at home when her uncle arrived. All things considered, I would miss Tara if she were not here. Her death had been the worst occurrence of my adult life, and I admit I find her spirit's presence comforting in a strange way. It is not as if I ever considered remarrying, and occasionally she does seem to grow more focused. I received a call from a former classmate of mine, Dr. Neil Kenny, who is a plastic surgeon working in the St. Louis area. He was considered a genius at the top of his class and had been expected to become a brilliant surgeon. There was almost an audible sigh of disappointment when he turned to nose jobs and facelifts as his specialty. Some had hopes that he would elevate the field of reconstructive surgery to an all-new high, but instead, he became sort of a dirty secret in the world of celebrity. He is, I believe, the go-to man for many of the highest-paid actors and the sickeningly wealthy. I was more than a little surprised when he called me and asked if I wanted to have lunch this week. Thinking it might be an interesting diversion from my holiday blues, I agreed. I set the date at a coffee house not far from my office and waited almost a full hour before His Majesty finally made his royal appearance. He hadn't changed all that much from what I remembered. He's still a tall, lanky type with the kind of sharp, disinterested good looks that men like him always seem to have. I was pleased to see that at least he was losing his hair, but even the added expansive forehead only served to add to his character. He started smiling and nodding to people like a politician running for office as he brushed snow from his coat with a handkerchief. He spotted me at the raised two-seat pub table where I sat by the window and waved as if we were old friends. I returned the facade, and soon he was shaking my hand with the false warmth of his. He apologized for being late, making some excuse about the train running slow or some such nonsense. I noticed he had a large bag slung over his shoulder, and he had no sooner sat down and ordered coffee before he had withdrawn an electronic notepad and sat it beside him on the table. "I know this is going to seem rude, Jarvis," he said with a half-hearted light apology of one who is truly self-absorbed, "but the reason I want to speak with you is because of your expertise." "Oh, so this is a business lunch," I replied with every fiber of my will stretched to an absurd degree in order to maintain the appearance of friendly interest. I had never been fond of Kenny, and had always felt the deep, jealous envy that all hard-working but average students feel when dealing with those who float lazily through their education on the wings of misplaced, God-given genius. Well, yes, I know it's in really bad taste to contact you after all these years just so that I may question you over a procedure. However, your expertise in ocular implantation surgeries are unsurpassed. I gave a quaint smile, knowing that he was well aware that I had retired from surgery shortly after Tara's demise some 5 years ago. After witnessing her long battle with leukemia, I had been drained of any ambition to continue in that complex and competitive field. It had always been Tara's dream that I would forsake the long hours and all-consuming career. Ironically, it was her death which had finally awakened me to the price I had paid for my renown. I had resigned from my position working for Yamashita Medical in New Brunswick and opened a small practice in the city within the following year. You flatter me, Neil, but I've been out of the limelight now for a long time. He smiled that cocky, one-sided smirk of his as he typed something on the screen of his digital notebook. "You're being modest, Jarvis. Your last paper on the use of electronically enhanced ocular implantation was nothing short of brilliant. I'm certain that you are one of the few experts in the country who can enlighten me in regard to a new procedure I'm currently trying to master." "I'm sorry, Neil, but I'm afraid I don't really grasp what you're getting at." "Okay, then. I shall clarify. The year before you retired from Yamashita, you were working on a design for an artificial eye, which could not only perceive and relate visual images directly to the brain, but could produce enhanced properties in lightless conditions. I stared at Kenny with complete disbelief. He was the first person I had met outside of my now dismantled research team with the knowledge of Project Nocturna. The program had been a fantastic and radical breakthrough in ocular design by which a subject's vision through artificial bionic eye replacement could receive visual information directly to the visual cortex of the brain, normally relegated to separate usable devices. Yamashita had at the time been in negotiations with several military and higher-level government agencies to develop the technology for use by law enforcement and military intelligence. I could only wonder what purpose Kenny had in mind for the introduction of such advancements to private clientele. Kenny spent nearly an hour questioning me over the specifics of the procedure and then, without a word of polite dismissal, began to pack his bag and go. I watched him leave with stunned curiosity and a small amount of personal insult. Not a single word of interest had been uttered concerning our personal lives, and my realization that I had just been hijacked for information had left me in a foul temper for the rest of the day. Chapter 5. The Journal of Clayton Marcells, October 23rd, 2049. I don't get it. How did they get the ghost light scanner from this? I said, as the final pieces of Levine's puzzle continued to elude me. Yamashita claims Indigo 9 replicates at least one of the energies that were witnessed being generated by the anomalies. Their story that technicians working on the project felt that their version of the energy was a diluted version, and that all it revealed were pale reflections of events from our own near past. However, they did not consider the possibility that within another string universe, almost parallel to our own, they too might have made the same discovery. But the truth still remains to be determined on the subject of Yamashita's knowledge and intentions. Whoa, wait a minute. So, what you are saying is that if I am using a ghost light here, and someone is using a ghost light in a parallel world in the same general area as designated by both realities, Levine added, nodding as I began to comprehend, then it creates a quantum bridge between the two. And within this bridge, it is possible for one string to affect the other? Yes, you have it, Mr. Marcells. The Neil Kenny that we executed here in our reality was not a serial killer. However, another Neil Kenny from some parallel world was. So, what people are seeing recorded on their scanners may or may not be the past as it appears to our own quantum string. I'm guessing that loosely 90% of the time it is our past, but somewhere around 10% of the time, if some individual in some other reality is running their scanner simultaneously, then there can be a cross-scan effect which can produce a very disconcerting repercussion to that user. What struck me about the Kenny case was that it almost seems like the other Neil knows what is going on and is using this knowledge to continue to kill in our reality. If he truly is aware of the ghost light's properties, then any person in our reality using a ghost light scanner is a possible victim, I finished. Correct. I became acutely aware that Levine was no longer smiling or excited. His demeanor had transformed into obvious anxiety as he once more adjusted the image on the monitor until it was transfixed over the center of the anomaly. "Do you see this area, Mr. Marcells?" he said, creating a square of red lines over a spot covering a 4-square-mile stretch in the near coast of Mississippi. I nodded as he pointed at it with one hand while he began to nervously scratch the stubble of his light beard with the other. "That is the exact center of the anomaly, and that stretch of land was just purchased by a subsidiary of Yamashita Enterprises." "What's out there?" I asked, as I discerned the outline of a small town near the center point. "Nothing but woods and what used to be a town before Yamashita bought out the whole real estate and then sent them packing. They've blocked it off from the outside world, both physically and technologically. I want to know what's going on down there, Mr. Marcells. Can't you hack their network? Their online security is impenetrable. It would have to be an inside job. Someone would have to go down there and actually log in through their own network. They know me, and there's no way they'll let me anywhere near Mossboro, Mississippi. So, you think that somehow I can? You should know better, Mr. Levine. Why would they let a data thief anywhere near their project? They would have to believe that they had no other choice. There's no way I could work a breach like that alone. I have friends on the inside, engineers and physicists working for Yamashita. Why can't they just give you the information? Because they're divided up their organization to the point that not only does the left hand not know what the right is doing, but the middle finger doesn't know that there is even a thumb. Welcome to corporate administration, I said sarcastically. So, why would I jeopardize my professional career and very life for the sake of your curiosity? It wouldn't matter if I told you that there's a strong possibility that they are tampering with forces that could destroy countless lives, would it? Not really. What would it take then, Mr. Marcells? I like money. I have some. More than what Yamashita is paying me to cover this up? No. Then I guess I'll just say my goodbyes now, but thank you for your time. Keep it in mind, Mr. Marcells, that my offer still stands. And also remember that if I catch you sniffing around my mainframe again, I will fry your cerebrum until you can't write your name with a crayon. I decided to stay in a hotel since the trip back to Nevada would be exhausting and I had a lot to contemplate. As soon as I settled in and turned on the room's table monitor to browse the news, I saw the headline, 2 more families slain. I perused the text and found that there had been 2 more mystery killings. Each was almost identical in style and execution, and both in Long Island in the same night. An impossible feat for one killer to accomplish alone without any clues or witnesses. The police refused to discuss any details and declined to comment on whether ghost light would be used to review the crime scenes. I had a sneaking suspicion that they already had. A side effect of the neural implant is lifelong insomnia in a troubling, overstimulated, unconscious state riddled with nightmares. Something about having a device hardwired into your nervous system interferes with normal brain function, and only 1 out of 1 million people even have the brain chemistry and psychological profile to handle it. Ironically, the engineers of the implants used consciousness control as a selling point for candidates, which of course was a lie, but whether it was one of ignorance or malice, I cannot wager to guess. It's often been said that you have to be born a Weinar, and after 20-some-odd years, I would have to agree. Even someone who has the right biochemistry is still subject to a slow degradation of their psychological state, and schizophrenia is more of an impending fate than just a slim possibility. I qualify as one of the lucky ones, having successfully functioned in the cyber arena for 2 decades with only a few signs of mental destabilization. The depressions were the hardest thing for me to deal with, but I seem to be able to ride them out with medication and a routine of physical wellness and positive reinforcement downloads. When I felt the heavy weight of hopelessness and anxiety creeping on, I would bombard myself with a steady stream of lighthearted comedic stimuli and, if possible, peaceful natural surroundings. In short, I would watch a lot of comedy and go camping. However, since my sister's passing, nothing would shake the tight grip of melancholy that had gripped me since the night I saw that ghost light recording. That was the subject of the dream which tortured me that night in the hotel. I was once more standing in her bedroom, having just found her body lying there on the bed in the eerie glow of the ghost light. There was her image, translucent and spectral, walking across the room, speaking to me as if I had been present in her last moments, except that here in the dream she was explaining to me that she hadn't killed herself. It was another woman in another world who had died, and she had actually been murdered by Neil Kenny. She was pleading with me to stop him in any way I could. I awoke sweating and weeping with a dull, thudding headache like a bubble of pain in the back of my neck. I curled into a tight ball with my arms wrapped around my legs as I shook and trembled in the cold of the climate control. It seemed like years that I lay in that state when I heard the beep of my room computer and an electronic female voice say, "Mr. Marcells, you have a message." Dragging myself up and nearly falling as I rose from the bed, I approached the table and eased down as the room spun with the power of the migraine. I told the computer by voice command that I would accept the message and winced as the screen lit up and clear letters began to appear across the blue field. "You know a little. Will you dare learn more?" I squinted with pain as I read the message. With shaking hands, I typed, "Who is this?" As I watched, the mysterious other answered, "Accept or decline." Whether it was my delirious state or simply fatalistic impulse, I typed, "Accept." What followed was an address for a destination in Savannah, Georgia. Printing the address, I watched as the message closed, and I limped to the bathroom where I climbed into the shower stall and ran warm water over my pounding head until the pain seemed to abate. Afterward, I ordered honey mint herbal tea and sat staring at the address as the sun began to rise outside the window of my room. Was I actually going to follow some bizarre message to Georgia? I wondered if Levine was stringing me along with this weird, childish game. This was a perfect example of something I would have asked my sister to help me with. If I was born with low empathy, then she had received it all for the both of us. I tried to visualize what advice she would have given, but all I could see was the image of her and the indigo light of my dream, begging me to stop her killer from striking again. Maybe I was finally playing with loose marbles after all this time. Then I remembered Levine saying that learned empathy could be a stronger influence than genetic empathy. I knew I was getting on another damned tran for Georgia in a few hours. Thanks, Mom and Dad, I thought, as I stood to get dressed. I'm sure that they were smiling in the great beyond with the knowledge that all those years of teaching me to give a shit were finally paying off. Chapter 6. The Journal of Clayton Marcells, October 24th, 2049. It was good to be back in Georgia. a place that still clung firmly to the ideal that the past had a beauty which ought to be preserved in much the same way as Portland. But here one could see the distinct impressions of a world so distant that it seemed ancient, amidst the crowded steel and glass cities of both coasts. After 2030, styles had become increasingly wilder and more self-expressionistic, especially among the younger members of society. But here in Savannah, everywhere one looked, there were steampunks of all ages in waistcoats and brass goggles. The style had become art and inspired a city filled with clockwork robot booth tellers and steam-powered transit system reminiscent of old coal-driven locomotives. There were horse-drawn carriages side by side with massive gear-filled automobiles which blew clouds of steam vapor from pipe smokestacks. The buildings had been meticulously repaired and kept with stunning detail on cobblestone streets lit by the orange hot glow of gas lamps. Of course, there were modern buildings to house the ever-present corporate enterprises, but here they were huddled in mass like a dirty secret sought only by those unfortunate enough to subject themselves to the bleak sterility of the modern life. Savannah had always been a city of ghosts, and it kept its secrets with pride and loyalty to both the darkness and the light of the past. What I loved most about the city were the trees. It was rare to find long roads over which the long branches of oaks and maple formed a solid arc that ranged for blocks in this world. But here, one had to but walk a mile or so through shady streets of Victorian houses, statue fountains, and lichen-covered stone walls to locate such beauty. I was home again. Already the heavy sadness of my previous despair was lifting as I wandered alone to find a table at some warm restaurant where I could eat a hot southern dinner. I found just a place and seated myself in a booth by the window where I could watch the rain falling and a steady drizzle on the street outside. I ordered hot coffee, ham with cornbread, and mashed potatoes with gravy as my mouth began a preliminary salivation brought on directly by the smells drifting in heavy, intoxicating clouds from the kitchen. I counted only a half dozen or so patrons as I glanced up at the older-style mounted television which sat in the corner of the ceiling across from me. It seemed that ghost light was temporarily out of the news, since a scientist from Denver had reported that he had recorded bizarre radioactivity in the Earth's stratosphere. I wondered if perhaps this had something to do with what Levine had said about Yamashita's goals, as my meal was placed before me on a piping hot solid white plate. All thoughts of my current mission, if I even really knew what my mission was now, were lost in the delight of using actual metal silverware to carve and eat my huge slice of sizzling ham. As I ate, I contemplated whether I might be able to find a cigar shop afterwards where I could sit with a glass of whiskey and smoke. It was only as my appetite abated that I remembered I had another destination in Savannah. The cigar and whiskey would have to wait. As I crossed the street after paying my bill, I withdrew my phone from my pocket. Applying the saved address to the GPS, I began following the guided map down the street some 10 blocks towards the docks without a thought of attempting to find a ride. I was enjoying myself too much to even consider not walking. I turned left towards a darkened avenue of closed shops, and counting the building numbers as I passed, halted before the vacant window of a shop which probably had not been open for more than 2 years. I double-clicked the screen of my phone and it was verified that I was indeed at the right address. If this had been the first time I had been led to contact someone at a phony meeting place, then I might have been frustrated, but I knew how this works. Someone was nearby watching me. I saw a reflection in the store window behind me and instinctually knew it was my contact. He was standing calmly across the street beneath the gas lamp, a tall, broad-shouldered black man dressed in true steampunk fashion with thick, auto-adjusting brass goggles, long knee-length coat, and a towering top hat that resting on a mane of thick braided hair. His gloved hands rested on the top of a cane, and clasped between the fingers of one was a large cigar. Most striking was that almost all of his attire, besides the white shirt and scarf tucked into his tight leather vest, was completely vibrant purple. As I turned to face him, he smiled beneath his thick beard and waved me to cross. "Mr. Marcells, so pleased you come," he shouted with a loud, booming voice that echoed over the emptiness of the deserted square. I approached cautiously, but with not a little interest, as the goggles the man wore spun in alternate directions, only to stop with the left lens apparently magnifying my appearance to the viewer. "No weapons? Are you too confident or too stupid?" the man said, smiling as he puffed on the cigar, sending a strong but exquisite smell of cloud smoke over my head. "In my experience, it rarely does any good to show up at these kinds of things armed," I explained as I returned my phone to my pocket. "And what kind of thing is this, Mr. Marcells?" "Secret meetings with complete strangers. It's a semi-suicidal action in the first place, so why pretend I'm real intent on self-preservation? Truth is, if Yamashita catches wind that I may not be exactly acting in their best interests, I'm dead anyway. Besides, Levine doesn't really seem like the type to go through all this trouble just to kill me." "And are you so sure that I'm working with this, Levine person?" I stared at him for a moment and for the first time wondered if it were possible that someone else was involved in this mess. "It doesn't matter. If you have some more information on what's really going on here, then I've got to know." "You sound desperate, Mr. Marcells." "Do I? Maybe I am. Maybe this little piece of jewelry attached to my brain has assured me that I'm on a countdown to insanity, and I want to know what's going on here before I can discern reality from delusion anymore. Let's go talk." He slapped me on the shoulder and began to walk down the street into the shadows. "You know where any cigar shops are still open?" "Afraid not, Mr. Marcells. Besides, I have some friends I want you to meet." We walked for what seemed hours before turning into an alley and passing between the trickling brick walls of century-and-a-half-year-old buildings until we had crossed into a residential section of the Victorian district. Walking in the darkness between the modern street lamps, we came to a long elm-covered drive which stretched out to a huge house which loomed at the end, buried in mist and shadows. The drizzle fell into a hard rain which pelted us until we reached the rusted black iron fence which surrounded the somewhat ill-kempt structure. From where I stood, it would have been a prime location for a stop on one of the haunted Savannah tours. My escort opened the gate and held out his arm for me to enter. I stepped through and hurriedly approached the steps, slowing as I saw the wood of each was warped and cracked dangerously. I skipped the bottom two and ascended to the porch, which I was glad to find recently repaired. My host bypassed the steps altogether and brushed past me to the security module by the door. He lifted his goggles and placed his eyes over the retinal scanner before the door clicked archaically, and we entered. I had attempted a glance at his face, but he had returned his eye gear in place so quickly that I had missed my opportunity. The inside of the house was drafty, but warmed by economically friendly space heaters and a huge roaring fireplace just off the main hall by a set of stairs that looked as decayed as the steps on the porch outside. "Come on in, Mr. Marcells," the purple-clad steampunk called as he shook the rain from his hat and threw his soaked coat on a rack by the door. "Let me see if I can scare up some whiskey and a cigar for you." He led me into the study where He stoked the fire and gestured to a huge stuffed leather chair for me to sit. Good to his word, he produced a large tumbler of excellent whiskey and a cigar from within his own vest. He clipped the end for me and presented some matches for which to light it. Despite the extremely dangerous position I knew myself to be in, I was finding myself more comfortable and happy than I'd felt in months. And even though I had yet to learn the name of my unusual host, I was finding his company very lively and enjoyable. He sat across from me and placed his booted feet upon an ottoman, sipped his own drink, and stared at me through the constantly adjusting rig of his goggles. "Do you believe in reincarnation, Mr. Marcells?" he said suddenly over the sound of rain pounding against the shuttered windows. I gazed at him, trying to hide my surprise at such an out-of-place question, but my good humor prevailed. "Well, it's kind of an outdated concept," I replied, taking a deep, satisfying swallow of whiskey and enjoying the warmth that spread out through my extremities. "How so?" he asked, his tone still conversational. "Well, as far as the world in general is concerned, most religion has sort of mixed itself into a slop of traditions and ritual, but I know very few people who even think about life after death seriously anymore." "You are very correct on that account, Mr. Marcells. This world is obsessed with extending physical life, that few seem to value the concept of the spiritual. What is the average lifespan now?" "Oh, I think I heard someone say on a news broadcast it was somewhere between 80 and 120 in those countries with solid economy and access to modern technological medicine. But if you have the money, you can have your entire personality recorded and implanted into a cloned replica, if you wish, and you can continue on for another century like that, in theory. How horrible that people think of that as life, don't you think? It's nothing I would want for myself. You do not fear death, do you, Mr. Marcells?" "Oh, when I was a child and my parents were still living, I used to think of how much it would hurt them if something happened to me or my sister. After they passed on, I used to think that since I was all the family my sister had, it would break her heart if I were to die too. And now, there's no one left. And so the one who lived for everyone else is now the only one left alive." I never really thought of it that way. Oh, of course not. For then, you would have to admit that you feel betrayed. I stared into the thick lenses as they seemed to be assessing my very soul. "And exactly how do you surmise that?" I said through the cloud of smoke hanging between us. "You refused to die for them. But they did not do the same for you. Your sister committed suicide, did she not?" A cold numbness fell over me as I once more felt myself being lured and evaluated. But I knew how this game was played. I knew how easy it was to probe into someone's data and then use it to manipulate them. All cyber mages were the same in that respect. They loved to display their knowledge and power. "So exactly what is your point?" I said, still not rising to the steampunk's challenge. "My point is, Mr. Marcells, that you do not blame your sister for what happened. So who do you blame?" I looked at him with a mixture of contempt and admiration. "I blame those bastards at Yamashita for putting that goddamn nightmare machine on every shelf in this country." I realized that even as this stranger had prodded my psyche with his casual violations, he had somehow managed to bring me to a truth that by myself I would have refused. I wasn't here out of some self-destructive curiosity. I was here because I wanted revenge against the cold, power-hungry corporation which had, at least to me, destroyed my sister. Good. Now we have something to talk about. My name is Ryan Rose. As he spoke, I heard footsteps coming up the hallway across the ancient hardwood floors. I looked up to see another black man slightly younger than my escort with a shaved head and the same brass goggles enter and stand behind Ryan Rose's chair. This is my brother, Jesse. And yes, we are acquaintances of Dr. Levine. We want to help you, Mr. Marcells, and we need you to help us. Nothing is as it appears, and Yamashita is swimming in some very deep and very dangerous waters. If I told you that I knew you from a past life, would you think I was crazy? I laughed, despite the seriousness in which he spoke, and almost choked on the smoke of my cigar. Yes, Mr. Rose, I would. Well then, suspend your disbelief and pretend for a moment that the soul of a person is more complex, varied, and real than any religion ever gave it credit for. There are energies in the multiverse which exist so far beyond human technological evaluation that this world hasn't even touched on their qualities. There is a deficit of spiritual energy in this world that is so extreme that the only thing even approaching the power of which I speak is its artificial replica. This Indigo 9, and this corporation with its tampering has unwittingly become part in a game which was best left not played. After speaking with Harris, you must know that the anomalies show a link to other realities. Do you at least believe that? I know what he showed me, and yes, it did seem like a possibility. The possibilities are endless, Mr. Marcells. And I know that on some level you understand that, or you would not be here. It's time for you to come downstairs. The wine cellar of the house had been converted into one of the strangest computer labs I had ever seen. Everywhere there were monitors and outdated keyboards strung together with a litany of exposed wires and cables which all seemed to merge at a base unit station where the stranger identified as Jesse Rose seated himself and immediately began typing at the most modern of the equipment. There were 3 other people standing visible in the flickering overhead lights, all wearing the trademark goggles shared by the brothers. A tall, bearded man dressed in a priest smock stood beside another shorter, heavily built man in a vest and work pants. They both seemed to be watching a news feed when they noticed our entrance. The 2 gazed at me with rotating lenses as once more I felt as if I were being studied intently. A young woman dressed in a leather corset and knee-length red skirt, also wearing goggles, stopped her typing long enough to nod and smile before returning to her work. Ryan led me to the center station and pointed to the large monitor where Jesse was reading lines of coded data that flashed by so quickly it made my head spin. Even projected, it would have taken me hours to have the data delivered and decoded into my cerebrum, but Jesse was absorbing it as easily as if it were a magazine article on a sports page. I could see that he had no implant or scar behind his ear and was forced to accept that he was processing the data manually without cybernetic aid. Once more, I was met with the realization that I was completely out of my depth. Mr. Marcells, do you know what this is? Jesse said as his goggles reflected the blue light of the monitor screen. I coughed with embarrassment, but decided that professional pride had been lost altogether after my meeting with Levine. No, I don't. This is what your sister was working on at the time of her death, he answered as the readout continued to page down in a constant, uninterrupted flow. My sister had been a freelance computer programmer for most of her adult life. She was officially described as an ET, or emergency technician. In essence, she was tech support for tech support. When there was a crisis in the world of computer technology that could not be solved by the experts on payroll, she was the one that they would call. She had worked at one time or another for every corporation and government tech network in the field. What is it? I said, as a few random variables on the flowing text began to catch my eye with familiarity. Were you aware that she was working on a problem for Yamashita Enterprises? Ryan said with a flat, ominous tone. She couldn't discuss her job with anyone, especially someone in my line of work. She didn't even like people to know we were related. Had paid a great deal of money to have her original history file buried by the Safe Haven security firm. A company who for a price could guard your data from people like me. According to what I've been able to excavate from her files, she had been given a quandary by Yamashita concerning a probability formula. Yamashita had a theoretical experiment concerning ghostlight with a particular technological glitch. She solved it and was found dead 3 months later. Once more, I was struggling to assimilate the pieces of this errant puzzle. Now here are the work profiles of the first 4 families supposedly murdered by Neil Kenny. The screen before us split into 4 segments, each with the employment information of the adult members of the murdered families. I began to read the information, which Jesse outlined in glowing violet. Toby Curtier, lead lens designer and refraction specialist for Albright Lighting Incorporated. Miriam Larnett, diagnostic computer specialist for Albright Lighting Incorporated. J.R. McCullum, field installation manager for Albright Lighting Incorporated. Trey B. Benson, efficiency and energy relay design engineer for Albright Incorporated. My throat had gone dry. My heart pounded in my ears with a strange mixture of rage and sorrow. I knew, as well as they, that Albright Incorporated was an owned subsidiary of Yamashita working out of St. Louis, where the first murders had occurred. These were not random victims of a serial killer, but were the collateral casualties of a corporate cover-up. The brothers were staring at me with blank, expressionless faces as I heard my sister's voice from the memory of a dream saying, "I did not kill myself." But how is that even possible? I asked, as I tried to comprehend, but finally found my emotions too much to control. They created a quantum bridge between 2 parallel worlds. It was the man dressed as a priest who spoke from behind me. He approached solemnly with his hands folded behind his back. We theorize that in 2 separate worlds there exist 2 Yamashita Enterprises that have stumbled across the Ghostlight project at roughly the same time. In their earliest experiments, it became apparent that they were in contact with each other via their simultaneous use of their first Ghostlight prototypes. Although they found both realities divergent, both worlds were similar enough for continued contact and interaction to be established. In essence, they merged into one organization operating in 2 different realities. One difference, however, is that in this other world, Yamashita has risen to the level of being a controlling world power. They are, in fact, a government within themselves, and their world has suffered for it. It became the goal of our version of Yamashita to rise to the same level as its twin, and for the 2 to exceed all limits and and become the controlling power in both realities. The events that have been transpiring here over the past few years have been due to Yamashita's plan to rise above world governments and become the one controlling body in this reality. It became necessary for them to begin to eliminate all of those who were instrumental in the development of the Ghostlight Project. So, Neil Kenny is working for Yamashita. I felt the familiar ache of another migraine closing in, and I silently wondered if perhaps I was in the middle of a schizophrenic episode. "This is crazy," I shouted as my head began to pound. "Even if it were true, how could you even hope to stop this?" "We have agents on the other side," Ryan answered. "They are working to end Ghostlight over there, and we are working the same angle here." "So, you've made contact through Ghostlight too?" I began to feel dizzy and nauseous as the seated man in the vest stood and brought me to his chair. I sat down and fought to keep from losing my southern dinner all over the floor of the converted wine cellar. "Yes, we communicate using Ghostlight." "How much more can you handle, Mr. Marcells?" Ryan said as he squatted in front of me and placed a strong hand on my shoulder. I looked up at those damned goggles and wished I could see the expression in his eyes. "We're not from around here, Mr. Marcells," he said, and as if reading my mind, hit a small button on the side of the apparatus, causing a faint click from behind. He slowly removed the brass contraption, and I found myself staring into enormous, black, inhuman eyes. Eyes that, for all I could discern, resembled nothing I had ever seen more than those of a bird. The pain in my head had become a stabbing, pounding eruption, and soon small white spots were sailing like stars in my vision as I lost consciousness. When I awakened, I was lying in an old bed with clean blankets in what I guessed was a bedroom somewhere else within the house. There was a space heater beside me, and the sound of rain outside in the darkness told me that most likely not too much time had passed since I had lost consciousness. I was dizzy, but the pain in my head had subsided. My leather coat was lying with my shoes in a chair by the small fireplace, which was flickering with low blue flames and deep orange embers. I could tell by the incline of the cracked cobweb ceiling that I was in an upstairs room. I looked down at my arm and realized that my sleeve was raised and a small band-aid placed on a spot near the inside of my elbow as if I had been given an injection. I noticed a small camera dome in the corner of the room, and I knew I was under surveillance. I had barely begun to pull myself up onto my elbows when the door opened and Ryan walked in with his goggles back in place. I knew that I should be nervous or frightened, but the calm fog of whatever drug they had given me left me feeling numb and without reactionary emotion. "You have the sickness, don't you?" He seated himself on a stool beside the bed and tapped behind his ear to imply he was referring to my implant. I did not respond, but only stared at his face, remembering what I had seen behind his eyewear. "Yes, I know it is quite a shock, but you really must understand that our time is limited, and you need to see and believe what we are telling you." "So, what are you guys then? Aliens?" I asked groggily, bringing a smile I now found unnerving. "No, we are people just like you. But you have to have an open mind, Mr. Marcells. It seems that you have drugged me, so guess my mind is about as open as it's going to get. We only gave you a painkiller to alleviate the symptoms of your migraine. You'll be fine in a few hours, but my question for you is, do you want to know more? That seems to be the very question which has landed me in this situation, Mr. Rose. Call me Ryan. Okay, Ryan, since I've already stepped aboard the crazy train, we might as well finish the ride. Who the hell are you people? He sat with his hands folded for several moments as if contemplating how to begin. Then taking a deep breath, he said, "Do you remember when Levine showed you the anomaly over the south, Mr. Masilles?" I nodded that I did. "You glimpsed a world that appeared to have been destroyed in some catastrophe. There was a time when that world was very much like this one. However, there was within it several ancient powers at work, which you might call demons or gods. But what could more accurately be described as rampant strange of anomalous energy. I could try and explain to you the nature of these beings, Mr. Masilles, but honestly, I don't think anyone has ever really managed to comprehend them, except beyond the understanding that they are channeled through humans. Some people, psychics to be exact, are able to interact with these energies in a kind of symbiosis, sometimes even parasitic fashion. Some of these entities prefer this kind of partnership, but others are very destructive and only use their hosts as a vessel for their own purposes. Which are, I sounded somewhat glib, I knew, dominion, transmutation, and expansion from what we can surmise. One of these entities managed to destroy our world. How? I said, restraining my further lightness of tone. A plague of the undead, he said with calm seriousness. Like zombies? I said, almost laughing out loud. The painkiller was not helping my self-control at all. Something like that. But there were survivors, and with the help of entities far more caring of the human condition, the world had begun to rebuild. There were a great many events that transpired that I have no time or ability to explain. I and my brother both died in the first apocalypse on our world, killed by the demonic scourge. We were reborn again later in a time while the world was rebuilding. This time of regrowth was stifled by a war which broke out amongst the remaining survivors, and it ended with the death of me, Ryan, and a few other leaders of survival groups. When we died, we were in the service of a powerful entity that took the form of a bird, a raven with the ability to open portals between worlds. We have come to believe that the raven may in fact be some kind of guardian of these gates. The raven directed us to these worlds where technology had created a shoddy replica of its energy, the ghost light. So you have big black eyes, because you tend to take on the characteristics of the entity of which you serve. You should see my friends in the other reality. So you died in the other world that I saw through the anomaly. That's right. And you were reborn here. Right again. Jesse and I, up until 5 years ago, were Freddie and Benjamin Hansen. When did you start to remember your past life? I said, now feeling the edge of the medication began to fade as I began to take in more of what Ryan was saying. Ghostlight, my friend. It brought the raven, and the raven knew us. It took a while, but we eventually got the band back together. And how do you communicate with your friends in the other world? Once again, the answer is ghostlight. But on a side note, that might not have even been possible if it were not for your sister. How's that? I said, feeling a dead weight on my chest at her mention. That data we showed you was a probability formula on calculating the possibility of being able to locate and activate a ghostlight scanner from an alternate universe. Very helpful information to someone who was using ghost light to kill people from across a dimensional gap, don't you think? I still don't understand how the hell this guy is managing to kill people from another parallel universe and then make it look like a suicide or that someone else did it. We're kind of wondering that ourselves, Mr. Marcel, and we are hoping that you might be able to help us find out. How? I asked, now sitting on the side of the bed, rubbing my head with the pain that had been so sharp and excruciating not so long ago. Yamashita has built a security complex in Mississippi. The employees that work there have to live on premises and are not allowed to leave. We have a friend planted inside the corporate complex, and she can get you access to the company mainframe. How do I get in the complex? Yamashita has employed you to investigate their liability in the matter of Ghostlight's danger to the consumers. Your security clearance will take you far enough in that our contact can get you an hour at the best in the tech lab. But the odds of you being able to pull this off without Yamashita knowing what you're up to and seeking your immediate termination are pretty much non-existent. This will be like a death sentence. Don't be so dramatic, buddy boy. You've been on a hit list ever since you started working for Yamashita. Do you really think they were going to let you go after you started turning over all these loose stones and seeing the shit underneath?